Live streaming? Well, good morning everyone. Sorry we were slightly delayed. They shut the main road from Yelverton to Tavistock this morning just to keep us on our toes. And you'll be glad to know that Devon Bridge was quite busy. They're digging it up as well. Right. So before we go any further, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves, starting with Councillor Moody.
Councillor Jeff Moody, Tavistock North for, can you hear me? All right. Tavistock North and member of the committee. Thank you.
Councillor Graham Reid, Councillor for Tavistock North, one of three.
Councillor Tony Illich, Oakhampton North.
Councillor Patrick Kimber, Hatherley Ward.
Councillor Alistair Cunningham, Buckland Monacorum Ward.
Councillor Caroline Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Councillor Sam Wakeham, Hatherley.
Morning members, Phil Baker, Strategic Planning Manager for Southampton West Devon.
Claire Stewart, Principal Planning Officer for West Devon Borough Council.
Pat Weimer, Head of Development Management.
David Fairbairn, Head of Legal Services and the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Councillor Rick Cheadle, Buckland Monacorum, Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward Member.
Cathy Hall, Democratic Services Officer for West Devon.
Thank you. And do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Jury and Councillor Southcott, and Councillor Kimber is substituting for Councillor Southcott. Thank you.
Yep. Item 3 on the agenda is declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any item to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Mott?
I'm sure I, in line with the other members of the committee, have had an email from the applicants regarding this.
Yes, I think probably most of the committee have had that. It's not in the public domain, so...
No, okay. Just for noting.
Yep, thank you. Item 4 was items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my attention. And so item 5 is the confirmation of the minutes of the 13th of January 2026. Are you content with those minutes? Shows, thank you. And we now have a short statement from our legal advisor.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for those members of the public who are listening in, maybe not quite so familiar with the way in which planning decisions are made, the committee this morning will have regard to the development plan and to any material considerations. And insofar as they have to have regard to the development plan, decisions will be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations suggest otherwise. For the purposes of the application that's before you this morning, the development plan comprises solely the joint local plan. Material considerations are those considerations that are concerned with the use and development of land in the public interest. Anything else that isn't concerned with those matters is irrelevant and won't be taken into account. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well, we have one planning application in front of us today, which is 321725 OPA land at Lamerton. We have a couple of speakers, but before then, I turn to the planning officer for her brief. Thank you very much.
Apologies, thank you, Tim. So, application for consideration today, 321725 OPA. Outline application with all matters reserved except for access for residential development of up to 20 dwellings. Here is the application site on on a base map outlined in red. The benefit of members who were unable to attend the site visit on Thursday of last week. This is the road, if you can see where my cursor's hovering around, this is the main road up into Lamberton. Lamberton's quite a dispersed settlement, so the village primary school is off the map in this direction, and the church. There's a number of residential properties along this road, and then the village pub is just opposite the site where my cursor's hovering now, and you've got the community centre across the road over there. The application site, as you can see, has currently got 2 road frontages along this side and this side, which is a much more minor road. Aerial photograph, just to show you a bit more site context. Yeah, the Blacksmith Arms is the pub across the road. The application site is this field here. And as you can see, at present, there is open countryside beyond the site around here, with some further residential development to the south east of the site down here. And up here, and as I said, the community centre is here, and then the primary school is away in this direction. Just again, this is the extract from the site location plan that was submitted with the application, showing the formal application site outlined in red. Whilst layout and appearance, etc., everything is reserved except for access, and indicative plans have been provided to show how up to 20 dwellings could potentially be accommodated within the site. You'll note that this plan shows 2 points of access into the site here and here. And then as access is to be considered in detail, this is the formal plan which would be referenced on any formal decision, showing the 2 points of access into the site from the adjacent public highways. This would be the main primary access into the site. The existing field gate for users of the public footpath across the site, which we used at the site visit, is just here where my cursor's hovering, and you can just about see, I think, the line of the existing public footpath that runs through the field. So there would be the principal primary access here, and then a secondary access is proposed here. So the existing field gate that we also saw on the site visit is just here. So the intention would be to create a new secondary access into the site further along the road frontage, just in there. Okay, I'll now just run through a series of photographs. You should just be able to see the existing public footpath sign marking the way into the site at present for pedestrians using the footpath. And that's the view looking back sort of towards the direction of Tavistock. And there's the view looking northwest towards the crossroads. And that's the same crossroads, but looking slightly in the other direction, so you can see the existing residential property on the other side of the road. And then the access road, where the secondary access will come from, comes out onto the main road, just where my cursor's hovering there. This photograph was taken from within the application site, looking towards the existing pedestrian access and the existing field gate access into the site from the main road. You can see the existing neighbouring residential properties are just here. Another photograph taken from within the application site looking to the west. So the site boundary where the secondary access is proposed is just in this location. Another photograph within the site looking towards the east, with the other properties that are closest to the application site that are existing visible. Those properties there are the ones on what was referred to as the old Village Hall site, which were developed relatively recently in the last few years. Just again looking towards the edge of the site into the countryside beyond. This photograph was taken looking into the site from the existing field gate on the other side of the site. And then looking to the northeast along the unnamed road back towards the crossroads, which is just there where my cursor's now circling around. And so coming into the key issues, as members will be aware from having read the site, there's previous planning history on this site, including an appeal decision, which was issued prior to the publication of the current version of the National Planning Policy Framework, which is a material change in circumstances since that appeal was considered, which I wouldn't anticipate is partly why the application has now come forward to be considered again. As members are aware, our housing supply situation has changed. The council is no longer able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore paragraph 11D of the NPPF applies in relation to this application, whereby any adverse impacts of doing so would permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole, with particular regard to certain key policies as set out. As is set out in the report, when the previous application was considered by the appeal inspector, they concluded quite clearly that the site was outside the settlement of Lamberton, so in the countryside for the purposes of decision making, and it was not presented as an affordable housing-led scheme. It was just proposing 30% affordable housing contribution, sort of in the usual way, as it were. And on the basis that the site wasn't coming forward as a TTB 27 compliant affordable housing-led scheme, that was essentially why the appeal was dismissed. There weren't any other reasons other than that. And so the key situation we find ourselves now in is that in terms of the other considerations, the plans that have been provided are essentially the same as was considered with the previous application. We don't have any technical objections outstanding in terms of drainage, ecology. All of those matters have been appropriately dealt with as far as they need to be for the purposes of this outline application. All other relevant detailed matters could appropriately come forward at reserved matters stage in the event of approval. And it is worth noting that we do have clear support from the Council's affordable housing team in relation to this application. The paragraph on the screen now is just taken as a reference point from the officer report. I won't read it out to you, but the key consideration that we have is when the application was considered previously, the council had a 5-year housing land supply, but the inspector felt from reading the decision, if it had been an affordable housing led scheme at that time, then that appeal potentially would have been successful. Now that we're in the territory of the tilted balance, the balance in the first instance tilts in favour of the application. So is the fact that it's still not an affordable housing led scheme. They are proposing 30% affordable housing as per standard policy requirement. Does it still need to be an affordable housing led scheme in compliance with TTP 27 in order to be acceptable, now that we're in the territory of the tilted balance. Officers are of the view that, bearing in mind where we are and sort of what the deficit is in terms of housing supply, the site was not considered by the inspector to be so completely detached from any settlement that it was completely unacceptable for any form of housing development. They would have accepted an affordable housing-led scheme at that time. Now that we're in the tilted balance, so the starting point of the balance is more in favour of the housing development coming forward, bearing in mind the location of the site is still the same. It is outside, but clearly adjacent to a sustainable settlement. Does the balance tip now in favour of development? Officers are of the view that it does, bearing in mind where we are with the housing supply situation, and in the absence of any other substantial harms arising, that's why the application has been recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as identified in report and completion of Section 106 agreement to secure all necessary obligations. And I'm assuming there's going to be lots of questions.
Thank you very much. So, questions for the planning officer? Go first.
There's a light here.
You got a question?
Yes, sir.
Off you go.
Could you go back to your last slide, please, Claire? Second line, could you enunciate the conflicts that are hinted at in that line, please? What are the conflicts in the spatial strategy?
So, as I said, the site is still in the country. If you're just looking at the policies of the joint local plan, the site is still in the countryside. It's not within the settlement. So we can't say that it accords with TTB 25 because it's not inside the settlement. It's in the countryside, so TTB 26 is applicable and TTB 27 is also applicable. And as I said, it's not an affordable housing-led scheme. There would still be affordable housing at a 30% contribution in accordance with other policies of the plan. But essentially, there is still, as was the case when the application was considered previously, it doesn't comply with TTB 26 and TTB.
So if you go to the slide previous to that one, where the last paragraph mentions about affordable housing led.
Yeah.
If this was an affordable led housing scheme, would it be better than what's being presented today, or different? Because at the minute there's a small percentage of affordable housing, and that perhaps might be the key issue.
I think it would be different because rather than, I don't think you could say it's better or worse because the changes to national policy and the introduction of the standard methodology means we're in a different place than we were prior to that.
Okay, can I just clarify then, affordable housing, how does that rate in our planning policies against general housing need?
There's a specific policy threshold that affordable housing should meet a certain level for sites of certain characteristics. And in the appeal decision previously, the inspector considered that it should have met a certain threshold and against policy TTB 27, and it didn't meet that threshold. Now, affordable housing is a priority rurally for the council, and the question now is whether or not a 30% affordable housing offer on this site, given the tilted balance and the need to boost our housing supply across the board, whether or not that should now be considered acceptable, which is policy compliant in a lot of other spatial considerations. So it should weigh in favour because there is still a 30% offer on site.
Can I just jump in there, of course, and give you my usual witch's warning that we're dealing with the application that is in front of us, not a different application that might be in front of us.
Clear, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moody.
Just on that case, if I just have clarification, that TTV 26 is basically for development that is acceptable within a village setting or within a village boundaries, as I understand it. And 27 is an exception that if there are benefits that outweigh the harm, then that is more acceptable. Is that my understanding correct?
TTV 26 relates to development of all sites that are in the countryside. So outside of any named higher tier settlement within the joint local plan. And then TTV 27 relates to affordable housing led schemes on sites adjacent to settlements that would not otherwise be considered acceptable, but are considered acceptable because that additional level of affordable housing is that more tangible benefit.
And they are an exception.
Yes.
TTV 27 is the exception. So the 26 protects the countryside from overdevelopment for market housing, I guess, and not affordable housing, whereas 27 tilts the balance, if I can use that term, tilts the balance towards affordable housing. That's the purpose of 27. I just wanted to so that everyone is clear what we're talking about. Okay. First of all, I'd just like to ask the question. I noticed in this application, are the two vehicle accesses part of this application? And they are, or are they under future?
Sorry,
I'm just asking.
Are there two accesses?
The two accesses, there are two accesses included in this application. It's not for reserved matters. I wanted to make that clear. I went out there the other day, and can you also tell me what highways have said about the accesses? They feel that they comply? I think you said that there were no technical issues.
If you turn, highways haven't raised objection. If you turn to section 2 of the report, it does have the comments of the Highway Authority set out there, and they're not raising objection to the
highways. I just want to clarify that highways are not objecting. I went out there the other day, because I couldn't make the site visit, and I drove up and turned down the little lane around the cottage on the left. And after I'd found a parking space way down, a turning space way down, I came up onto the main road. And I had my heart in my mouth. I had to nibble out onto the main road, and I couldn't see any traffic coming along until I was fully out. And I know this isn't a material, I'm just saying.
What I was going to suggest is, are you heading towards a question? Or
the question is, is that I'm amazed that highways haven't made an objection, because it was an incredible. So that was my question. So I have a further question. I did ask the officer by email, what we've got to do with this development is look at the pros and the cons, the benefits and the harm. I wanted to know, other than 6 affordable houses for our affordable housing stock included within the 20, what other benefits are there of this development?
So, in general terms, it's significantly boosting the housing supply within the area. So it offers a range of homes across size, type and tenure. Given the rurality of the location and the limited availability of new homes coming onto market for local people to retain living in their local community, that as an offer is notable and significant. I would, if you haven't already read the appeal decision from when the application was considered by the inspectorate previously, The inspector quantifies the benefits and attaches moderate weight to the benefits at that point in time. And the nature of the exercise now is, having halved our housing land supply because of the new housing numbers that have been imposed by government, you're absolutely right, it's a weighing exercise. So the planning balance, the overall benefits versus impact. The starting point for that exercise now is significantly different than it was previously because the housing land supply is halved. So the inspector at that point in time had quantified moderate benefits based on the range of benefits that the scheme offers, not just in terms of on-site, but also in terms of how the site does relate to the village. Although it's being characterised as being outside the built form of the village, it clearly is within walking distance to a lot of the services and facilities of the village as well. So you're absolutely right, that is the nature of the exercise, but we just need to understand that the starting point now is different than it was previously.
Any other questions? Councillor Kimber?
My first question is, the footpath, I presume that's not at risk in any way. It will continue to be there.
This application doesn't propose to alter the route of it. That will need to be considered further at reserved matters stage, but there would need to be a separate footpath diversion order in the event they wanted to actually change the route. But it's not at risk of being closed off as a result of this application.
Councillor Leach?
I believe I read in this report, this is the access going onto the lane that's just been mentioned. I think it was the inspector recommended that if it went ahead, that would be just for pedestrian only. I guess even the inspector realised how dangerous it is to take vehicles or even more vehicles out the other end. So is there any way that this can be a condition? Or do we only have to make a decision on what's there?
Notwithstanding the highways officer comments that the access is acceptable, if members felt that the development was acceptable but only with the access only with a vehicular access onto the main road, my view is that the only way that could be done, I don't think it could be done by condition because you'll have approved plans showing 2 vehicular accesses. So I think the only way you could do it would be an approval subject to the receipt of a revised plan only showing pedestrian access onto the lane and a vehicular access onto the main road, because if not, you'd end up with a condition saying this access shall only be pedestrian, but an approved plan showing it's vehicular. So I think you'd have to be on the basis of getting a revised plan that shows that point. But I have to come back to, I think members have to be quite clear on the reasoning for that, if on the basis that the highways officer doesn't have a problem with either vehicular access.
Okay, any other questions? Goodness. Councillor Wakeham.
So is there a footpath up the small lane that takes you from the... No.
Do you mean the...
Yeah, from that one.
No, it's just a very narrow single track road.
There's no pavement either.
No. Yeah, there's no pavement.
Councillor Kimber and then Councillor Reid.
So the NHS statement says UHP, which I presumably means Universal Health Provision, is currently operating at full capacity, and then it says if we go ahead, it'll have a detrimental socio-economic impact on the community. So can we give any weight to that statement when we're making our decision?
It's University Hospitals Plymouth is what UHP stands for. They have requested a financial contribution, which would be secured through a Section 106 agreement to address their concern.
So that mitigates the issue?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned about the legal implications. The hierarchy of the government's imposition of increased housing targets, is that a statutory requirement as opposed to our own policies, which presumably are statutory? Could we have a view on that, please?
Chairman, the NPPF and the government guidance is clearly a material consideration, and as such, because it post-dates the joint local plan, it carries significant weight, and therefore, if we were not, so it is a material consideration that is very much capable of overriding the development plan. If you remember what I said at the beginning, you decide decisions in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations suggest otherwise. Well, government policy in the form of the NPPF and PPG and ministerial statements are material considerations and carry significant weight.
Okay, have we finished questions to the officer at this stage? Councillor Mott, were you minded? No? Right, okay, we have two registered speakers, and the first is Mr. Beecham, who is the agent, if you'd like to come up. Okay, just before you get going, I'm sure you're familiar with the arrangements here. You've got 3 minutes, and when you're ready, off you go.
Thank you.
Just stop you when you get to your time limit.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm speaking on behalf of Baker Estates in support of our outline application. The application before you benefits from the full support of all statutory consultees. Lamerton is identified as a sustainable village in the joint local plan, and the site is well related to village facilities, which the development will help to sustain. The proposals are modest in scale and will deliver a range of important benefits. Your affordable housing officer has affirmed that there are significant benefits of the scheme in terms of the affordable and market housing offer. The proposals will also deliver ecological enhancements, 10% biodiversity net gain, and provide contributions towards the NHS, as well as play and sports facilities in the parish. It will also deliver an alternative through route for vehicles using the constrained crossroads by the Blacksmith Arms, therefore providing a safer solution than the current situation. Hopefully that responds to your question, Councillor Moody. This is a benefit that can only be delivered by this application. For all these reasons, your professional officers have rightly recommended approval. Policy TTV 25 requires at least 550 homes from sustainable villages, for which there is a significant shortfall. Across the district, there is also a critical housing supply shortage, with the authority only able to demonstrate 2.53 years against the minimum 5 required. The significant shortfall is a matter to which members must, as a matter of law, give significant weight. As your officers confirm, the shortfall renders the JLP's housing policies out of date, including both TTV 25 and 27. Accordingly, the NPPF directs members to apply the tilted balance. There is no realistic prospect of reducing the significant housing shortfall without a proactive approach to applications within sustainable villages that do not give rise to adverse impacts, as is the case here. Due to the chronic shortage of new housing, affordability in Lamerton and West Devon is significantly worse than the national average. There are 955 households currently on the waiting list in West Devon, and for every 3-bed affordable home that becomes available in Lamerton, there are over 70 bids. This clearly demonstrates the significant level of unmet need, with many households forced to leave the area. This is also reflected in letters of support we've received from those seeking a home locally. I therefore urge members to consider the principle of development and the significant policy changes since the previous application. The NPPF test is whether the adverse impacts of granting permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. That is a very high bar, and as the officer report confirms, there are no adverse impacts identified. To refuse would also be inconsistent with other decisions taken by this committee. At the previous meeting, members approved an application for 12 homes at Bratton Clovelly, a less sustainable village with fewer facilities than Lamerton. It would be inconsistent to approve that application but take a contrary view on the proposals before you today. A refusal also inevitably puts even more pressure on the thriving towns like Tavistock and Oakhampton to make up the shortfall. I've set out today why approval is the only appropriate course of action and why refusal would be unreasonable and inconsistent with policy and other decisions taken by this committee. I therefore urge members to approve the application. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. Right. Questions for Mr. Beecham? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kimber.
Sorry, you talked about the through road improving the position for is it for the crossroads? Is that because people can drive through the estate to avoid the crossroads?
That's correct, yes. As Councillor Moody mentioned earlier, that crossroad does have fairly limited visibility. This through road provides a much safer route through the development to avoid needing to use that as an option. And as I said in my speech, that's obviously a benefit of the proposals before you today that can only be delivered by approving this application.
Any other questions at this stage? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh,
You've got to
Councillor
raise your hand.
Raise your hand. Okay, I thought putting the light on was sufficient. Mr. Beecham, thank you for your presentation. In view of the fact you've made a clear statement with regard to the housing need across the area, why is there only 30% of the housing on this site for affordable status? Why isn't it larger? We've already heard from the officers that affordable housing is part of the justification for making this application valid. Why is it only 30%?
Well, the local plan sets key policy parameters around the provision of affordable housing. It is crucial that development proposals that come before this committee are in fact viable and deliverable, and the proposal before you today is, and that is why we have a 30% policy requirement for affordable housing enshrined within our proposals that will meet a very clear need. Now, I am aware, and some of you members may have questions about the Green Hill application that was granted planning permission some time ago. That does indeed have a higher level of affordable housing included within the proposals. But to date, that proposal hasn't come forward. Our proposal is clearly viable and deliverable, and we have an excellent track record of bringing forward schemes successfully. And therefore, the proposal before you today with the 30% affordable housing will go a long way towards meeting some of the needs identified in the village.
Taking into account the number of properties is speculative on your application, what number do you expect that to be in actual hired houses? That 30%, how many houses will that be?
That will be 6 affordable homes, and that will be enshrined within the legal agreement for the site.
Councillor Guthrie.
Just to clarify, because I know your development in Dartington has a wide-ranging spectrum of cost of housing, and I noticed on until you reached the level of, I think it was £975,000 houses, none of the other houses below that threshold had PV applied to them. So is that going to have a similar showing on this development?
Sure. So I think the first point is that it is important as part of any application to deliver a range of different types and sizes of accommodation to meet a wide range of needs. I think in terms of the point around PV, we did submit a carbon reduction statement as part of our proposals that sets out a process through which we will follow as part of any subsequent reserved matters. Now, this is a scheme that will in all likelihood be aligned with the Future Home Standard. Having said that, the carbon reduction statement sets out that we will follow a fabric first approach. So that starts with high levels of insulation. Our standard product at Baker Estate is already higher than the minimum required under Part L. So we'll be looking to incorporate high levels of insulation to reduce energy demand in the first instance, before then moving on to consider other measures, whether that's heat pumps or PV and so on. That will all come as part of the reserved matters stage, but there will be an important principle that guides the application, both at outline as well as part of the subsequent reserved matters.
Before we get too involved in what these houses specifically are going to be, this is an outline planning application.
It is.
The actual design of the houses, should we approve the outline application, will be subject to reserved matters. So we're not here today to talk about whether there are solar panels on the roofs or whether there are this and that. This is the outline planning provision, just so we're all clear. On that basis, any other questions to Mr. Beecham? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, our next registered speaker is Councillor Jury, who's the ward member. no stranger to this committee, has the luxury of 5 minutes should he need it. And the clock will start when you press the button.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for allowing me to address you today as the ward member. I want to begin by recognising the context in which members are being asked to determine this application. National planning policy has changed. The revised National Planning Policy Framework places significant emphasis on increasing housing delivery, and the Officer report explains that when assessed against the new standard methodology, the joint local plan authorities can no longer demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. As a result, paragraph 11D of the NPPF, the so-called tilted balance, is engaged. However, it is important to remember that the NPPF itself is clear on one key point. The development plan remains the starting point for decision making. That principle has not changed. Paragraph 12 of the NPPF confirms that the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not override the statutory status of the development plan. In this case, the development plan is the Plymouth and South West Devon Joint Local Plan, which this council helped to prepare and adopt. The plan established a clear spatial strategy for where housing growth should occur and where it should not. The central planning question before members today is therefore quite straightforward. Does this proposal comply with that spatial strategy? Members will know that this is not the first time this site has been considered. In 2022, an appeal for essentially the same development, around 20 dwellings on this land, was dismissed by the Planning Inspectorate. The inspector examined the site carefully and reached a very clear conclusion. The site lies outside the built-up area of the village and therefore within the countryside for the purposes of the joint local plan. On that basis, the inspector found the development could not be assessed under policy TTV 25, which relates to the development within sustainable villages. Instead, it had to be considered under the countryside policies, TTV 26 and 27. The inspector concluded that the proposal did not meet the exceptions allowed under those policies and therefore conflicted with the spatial strategy of the local plan. That reasoning is highly relevant to the decision members are being asked to make today. The inspector also made a broader point, which I think is worth reflecting on. He concluded that granting permission in those circumstances would undermine the plan-led approach to housing and the spatial integrity of the development plan itself. That concern is even more important today. Members will be aware that Lamerton has already experienced a significant level of housing development in recent years. The Parish Council has pointed out that the indicative level of growth expected for a settlement of this side has effectively already been exceeded through recent approvals and completions. In other words, the village has already played its part in delivering the housing growth under the joint local plan. The risk, therefore, before this committee is not simply about this site alone. The risk is about precedent. If development on land outside the built form of a sustainable village is now to be approved, primarily because the authority cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, then the same argument could potentially apply to land adjoining many towns and villages across West Devon. That would result a very significant shift away from the carefully balanced spatial strategy that underpins the joint local plan. Of course, the tilted balance must be taken into account. But the tilted balance does not mean that planning permission must automatically be granted. It requires members to weigh the benefits of development against the harm that may arise. In this case, members have to consider whether the benefits of around 20 dwellings outweigh the harm of setting aside the countryside policies of the local plan and creating a precedent for similar developments elsewhere while the plan is being reviewed. My concern, and the concern expressed by the Parish Council and many residents, is that approving this application would weaken the ability of the Council to defend the spatial strategy of the joint local plan during what is clearly a period of transition in national planning policy. Chair, members, this is not an argument against housing delivery. It's an argument about where development should properly take place in accordance with the plan that this council has adopted. For those reasons, I would urge members to carefully consider whether the proposal truly complies with the joint local plan and whether approving it will risk undermining the plan-led approach that the planning system is intended to uphold. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Jury? No, very clear. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wakeham.
Thank you. Would you object if this proposal was on a brownfield site?
I think that if it was a brownfield site, different policies would apply.
Application in front of us, not the one that isn't in front of us.
Yeah, and I think therefore a completely different consideration would be in effect. So,
thank you.
I think the answer to your question is probably yes.
Councillor Guthrie.
There's talk from the agent stating that there are 75 applicants for each home that comes up, which I thought was an unusually large figure. And we're talking about what is the genuine housing need in Lamerton. And that is in respect to this having come forward several times before, and other land mentioned, such as by the agent, the Green Hill Estate, has come forward. So I just think members need to have a good understanding of what is really required in a village of this size.
My understanding is that, and I don't recognise the figure that was put forward, I'm presuming that figure is across the housing development area as a whole. As far as work that's been done within Lamerton to assess local need, my understanding is that the proposals that are in place will already have met that local need.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Councillor Jury? No, thank you very much. So we've had the planning officer's brief, we've had the opportunity to question the developer, and we've had the ward members' thoughts. So that's questions done with. We're now in debate before we head towards making a recommendation and taking a vote. So would anyone like to contribute to the debate before we get to that stage? Councillor Moody? Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the officer's report. I appreciate the speakers today, and I have some serious concerns regarding this application. I acknowledge that the tilted balance under 11D of the NPPF applies because of the 5-year housing land supply shortfall. But it's important to recognise, for members to recognise, that paragraph 11D is not an override button. And I think, as Councillor Jory mentioned, that it's not an immediate green light for development. It's not a free pass, and it requires all members to exercise a planning judgment. It does not displace the development plan as the starting point, and it does not make this proposal policy compliant, because the office has already suggested that it is not policy compliant in her report. The NPPF also is clear that the presumption of favour of sustainable development does not change statutory status of the development plan as the starting point. The officer report also confirms that the site is outside the built-up area, is rural in character, does not relate well to a discernible built form of Lamerton, has limited and poor connectivity to local services and facilities, and it conflicts with policy TDV 1, 26 and TDV 27. And that conflict arises because it's not an affordable-led scheme. So the issue before the members is not whether this is policy compliant, on the officer's own analysis. It is not. It's about balancing the benefits with the harm. I understand that it's like a balance, that once the tilt is applied, it tilts. And then you put the benefits on one side and the harm on the other. I can't be any simpler. Looking at the fact that we are looking at 30% of affordable, this in practice means 6 houses. So the 6 houses, affordable houses, goes on one side of the scale. On the other side of the scale is our planning policy. The officer also makes it clear that there aren't any, we've gone through before, that there are no technical issues with the outline stage. But she does mention the Section 106 and also the the housing officer's agreement with the site. However, those two issues are not weighted planning issues or benefits, and their weight is actually neutral. In my view, the adverse impacts remain substantial. The heart of the spatial strategy, the distribution of development, the protection of the countryside, the poor sustainability credentials of the site, and whether this committee is prepared to set aside all of the policies for a scheme that it is admitted does not comply with them. So yes, the tilted balance applies, and as I said before, it's not a free pass. But what are these benefits? The harm of setting aside clear, unambiguous and material joint local planning policies is significant. And I personally suggest that they outweigh the tilted balance and the benefits that have been given to us. And for that reason, I am not persuaded that the benefits of this proposal are significant. And therefore, I would move to refusal.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. So I just put in the final tweaks to my, try and make it look and sound a bit more succinct than it possibly will do. Unfortunately, we have been placed in a difficult position as we are expected to make decisions which go against the strategic plan which we have in place, while being mindful of the demand for more housing from central government, regardless of any local feelings. Developers constantly mention the critical housing shortage, but fail to recognise their own role in delivering on sites that already have permissions to build. South West Water state that they are able to provide services from this site. However, given the regular use of the overflows and the recognised issues regarding this by this council, I am wary of accepting their statement. I'm also concerned about the vehicle access onto the lane, as I fear it will become a shortcut and a rat run for people wanting to avoid the crossroads. And were we minded to approve this application, I would hope that we could request a revision of a plan to show pedestrian and cycle access only onto that side lane. I find this a difficult situation because I am mindful of all of the policies that we have worked hard to establish within the joint local plan. We have based that on local consultation, on inspectors' consultations, and we have followed the strategic planning over several years, and the requirements from government have blown all of the plans across the country out of the water, leading to applications such as this that all the councils are now having to grapple with. I am struggling. I am mindful of the local opinion on this. However, I am also aware of the insidious position that we have been placed in by central government with these.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Briefly?
I just think that the government's imposition of the new housing targets, which overrides, it's suggested overrides TTV 2627, it's effectively removing committee control of development in the countryside areas. And I believe that what the government does not mean to do is to do that, because the new emerging policy, NPPF, has similar policies in it to TTV 26 and 27. So this override is not what the government intended. And I do believe, I agree with Councillor Jory, that the interpretation of the tilted balance could have significant and detrimental effects on West Devon and South Hams towns and villages, should this application be approved.
Okay, I've got a comment to make myself. But, yes, I thought, I mean, I've given this long and hard thinking as well, and I appreciate all of the points that have been raised today. But I thought it might be useful just to tell you where I'm coming from. The officer's report and the conversation and questions we've had make it very clear that were we judging this solely on the JLP, we would refuse it, because we have done so twice before, and so has an Inspectorate Appeal. But that was before the revision of the NPPF. The NPPF, at a stroke, as you all know, demanded a recalculation of the way that the housing need was assessed and halved our 5-year land supply, pretty much overnight. That made our plan out of date. And if you read the NPPF, it's very clear that if you haven't got a 5-year land supply, your development plan is rendered out of date. And I'm just going to read you a short paragraph. This is directly from the NPPF. The presumption in favour of sustainable development does not change the statutory status of the development plan as a starting point for decision making, and that's exactly what Councillor Jury said. But it goes on. Where a planning application conflicts with an up-to-date development plan, permission should not be granted. We do not have an up-to-date development plan. We have an out-of-date development plan. It goes on. Where the policies are most important for determining an application are out of date, which ours are, decision makers should grant permission unless, and there are two clauses. One is that it's in an area that requires special protection, like a site of special scientific interest or a national park or an AOMB. And the other, as we've discussed a lot today, is where the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So whether we like it or not, and I think Councillor Mott put this very clearly as well, we have our JLP on one side, which would refuse this application. I think there's no doubt in my mind about that. And we have the NPPF on the other, which demands that we accept it, unless we can demonstrate demonstrable harm that significantly outweighs the benefits. I can't do that, personally. I've listened to the arguments, but I cannot muster enough collateral to say that they would demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And if, when we come to vote, we decide to reject this application, I should be asking for the reasons, the demonstrable reasons we're doing so, so that we can put that in the conclusions of our decision. So it doesn't give me any comfort to have that view, but that's my interpretation of it. Any other comments before I move the recommendation? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in view of what you've just said, can we just ask for a legal comment on what you said? Because it sounds to me that we as an elected body with a chance to do things for our community are now having that power taken from us through this process as enunciated by the people here today. And that means in future, these sorts of things are going to be that much harder for us to actually do what we think is right for our communities.
The position hasn't changed. You've always had to make decisions within a national framework. And the national framework has always been development plan first, material considerations, capable of outweighing that development plan. Nothing has changed there. What has changed is the emphasis on the other material considerations. They have introduced the tilted balance and required you to show demonstrable harm is caused if that balance is to be overturned. I mean, I think the question for members, and I think it's been enunciated on several occasions, but in the absence of a 5-year housing land supply, does policy TTV 26 have sufficient weight to overcome the tilted balance, i.e. the adverse impacts on the countryside are such that they demonstrably outweigh the benefits of having particular regard to the key policies of directing development to sustainable locations, making effective use of land and securing well-designed places and providing affordable homes, either individually or in combination. It is a question of weight. But ultimately, you have to act reasonably. And clearly, from the officer's perspective, the balance is very much in favour of granting planning permission. That is the officer view. And that's the weighing exercise they've done.
Councillor Moody.
And in reply, as I said in my original statement, is the officer also recognises that it's outside the built-up area and the rural in character does not relate well to the discernible built form of Lamerton, has poor, limited and poor connectivity to local services, and it conflicts with our policy. I understand what you said, Chair, but I think it comes down to this weighing of benefit and harm, and it's within the minds of the committee to make that decision. And I've clearly set out my stall where I'm have major concerns, and my biggest concern is the interpretation today will have influence over subsequent applications throughout West Devon. And officers may disagree with me, but I am of that mind.
Councillor Moody's kind of preempted. I do disagree. I do disagree with that. I think at the end of the day, it's not a precedent. You consider each application on its own merits. There are particular circumstances surrounding this particular application, which mean that it won't necessarily be a precedent for any other application elsewhere. They'll all be considered on their own merits. Thank you.
Caroline, Councillor Mott.
Mindful of the proposal that you're about to make, Chair, and trying to avoid the trips that we've had before on the committee. I'm trying to work out how, if we were minded to approve this, we would get in the request for an amended plan regarding the footpath and cycle access only to the side lane as opposed to the scheme that is in front of us now.
I'll turn to the senior planner. How would that process work?
The recommendation, I would suggest the proposal would be a delegated approval subject to the completion of the 106 agreement and the submission of a revised plan showing that access is pedestrian only if that's what members wished. I have to emphasise again, highways don't see a problem with that, and I'm assuming their main issue is that it probably will reduce the amount of traffic using the junction that's got, as Councillor Woody said, almost zero visibility until you pull out, because they'll then go through the estate and come out at a point where there is visibility. So I think highways saw it as a gain, a highway benefit, which is why it's there. So I think that needs to be, members need to weigh that up when they come to that conclusion. But that's procedurally how you deal with it.
I'm just concerned that estate, for want of a better word, I'm sorry if that's the wrong word, so I'm sorry. I'm just concerned that then will make that development become a rat run through there.
I think if I was having to use that lane on a daily basis, I think I'd be quite happily turning off the main road and going down the lane. But if I was coming back up the lane, would I go to that junction or would I go through the housing development? I'd go through the housing development all day long, because I think Councillor Moody's right. It is, you are Your heart must be close to in your mouth just pretty much every time you're coming out of those junctions. I think there's no doubt there is an improvement. That has to be balanced amongst the additional traffic going through the housing development. But my recollection of that lane, it's not massively busy, so I don't think there'll be a huge amount of additional traffic going through the estate. And if in my personal view, I think the highway improvement to giving an alternative access onto that road through the housing development probably outweighs the additional traffic going through that housing development on roads that will be designed to cater for that, for all of the traffic included, for not just for that development itself, but acknowledging that there will be some through traffic coming from that lane.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, but that isn't part of the tilted balance and the balancing that we have to do.
Not really.
I agree with quite a lot of what Councillor Reid and Councillor Moody have said to a point. Councillor Reid, I think you're absolutely right. I think the change to the standard methodology, I personally think the government knew exactly what they were doing, and it's put every rural authority in exactly the same position. If you haven't got a 5-year housing supply, which I'm not aware of any rural authority that has now got a 5-year housing land supply, because they were working to the previous figures. The only area where the standard methodology reduced housing numbers was London and the South East. So all the rest of the rural authorities, as far as I'm aware, haven't got a 5-year supply. And the NPPF is quite clear. If you haven't got a 5-year supply, the policies in your development plan that set out where housing should be, so your spatial strategy, are out of date. At a stroke, they are out of date. And you're right, that puts every authority in a very uncomfortable position, because you're looking to determine applications that are made outside of the spatial strategy when you've no longer got a spatial strategy, and until the area has a new adopted development plan that provides allocations to deal with whatever the numbers are, whether it's the numbers that are imposed at the minute or whether we've got an argument to say no, they're less. Yes, that we are going to be, all authorities, in my view, in that position will be at risk of these applications. And from an academic planner's perspective, I don't particularly like it, because it's no longer, in my view, it's no longer a plan-led system. Councillor Moody, the only comment I'm going to make is I agree with most of what you're saying about the tilted balance. What I disagree, with the greatest of respect, is that I don't think we can look at against it. It's contrary to policies, because those policies themselves are now out of date because of the 5-year supply. That's all I was going to say, which is kind of what the chairman said. Thank you.
Just in reply,
just before you do, I mean, I had just a supplementary comment to your comment, if I could put it that way. You described the balance, and on one side of the balance there were 6 affordable homes. I would argue there are also 14 houses in addition to those, and we have a housing crisis. So there are
we have a
bits on that side as well.
crisis, but not in Lamerton, because that's been satisfied by the Green Hill development. Going back to the officer's comment,
built.
We don't know when these houses will be built either. In response to the officer's suggestion that the government knew what they were doing, I don't accept that, because the new policies that are coming out through the new draft of the NPPF are almost very, very similar to TTV 26 and 27. So, but we can't go down the route of saying, why did the government do this or why did it do that? But all I'm saying is that that's where the movement is happening now. It's towards similar policies to 26 and 27.
I don't disagree. However, it's in the context of a new standard methodology, and all of those plans going forward will have to deliver enough allocations to deliver that new numbers, which is double what we've got at the moment. So it's in the context of, yes, those policies are going to be there, but in the context of you're going to have to allocate twice as much housing land to get the numbers that are coming through on the new standard methodology.
Okay. I've got Councillor Guthrie and then Councillor Reid.
I just want to make sure every member's clear that what we're doing is looking at policy that is inappropriate for where we are and how we're living. And when you're looking at a village, which has been highlighted by the local member, that has already exceeded its, okay, you can call it its prior housing requirements, that is surely of significance to us, regardless of a new kicking down the doors government policy. Equally, it's asking us to now only contemplate, if you like, a site that is easy to accept, easy to access, easy to build on, but eats up the countryside again when there are existing sites within that area which could easily be developed. So I think that everybody should not be too overly swayed by continually having to think that we're not going to comply with the NPPF, or we should have to do this and we should have to do that. We should be looking at what is the bona fide housing need within that area. I mean, surely that's something we're meant to be considering, as well as the legalities.
Okay, Councillor Reid. Councillor Reid's next.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate and have been, like many here today, on the cusp of thinking yes or no as regards approval or disapproval of this application. What I've just heard in the last few minutes will tell me why now. My statement is why I shall refuse this application. One is because of the nature of the idea that there is only 6 affordable houses in an area where we all know that affordable housing is perhaps the top of our list. It's been stated there's nearly 1,000 houses or 1,000 families waiting for properties. And then with this application, we have effectively, and I entirely agree with Mr. Weimer, that if I was coming up the narrow road, I would use this as a rat run rather than going to the junction. I think that's an appalling idea, taking into account that this new estate, even if it's only got 6 affordable houses, means young families and kiddies playing out in an area that ought to be a place where they can grow up in reasonable safety, and suddenly being confronted with all this traffic going through them. I wonder what the commercial implications of that are.
Any other comments? Could this possibly be your last one?
At the risk of repeating myself, I just wanted to make it clear that the policies, the JLP, is out of date, but it's not null and void. The tilted balance does not cancel our policies. They are still there, but they may be out of date and being reviewed. So I think it's clear that we all understand that. It's not as if they're not there at all. They are on the balance.
No, I think you're right, but it does go on to say that if you are going to go against the NPPF, you need demonstrable evidence of which outweighs the benefit. So you're right. Yeah. Any more comments? I think rather than start with the recommendation, which might include pedestrian access only, which gives me some concern because that road clearly goes to somewhere, and the somewhere might be somewhere someone wants to drive to rather than walk to. I will propose the recommendation as is in the report, and we'll see where we get to with that in the first instance. So the recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions set out in the report and completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure the planning obligations. So we'll now go to the vote. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Lott, thank you. So the recommendation is for his approval. So we now go to the vote. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation for approval, please show.
There's 5, Chair.
Those against, please show. So the application is approved. But thank you for the debate, and I think it was a debate worth having because this will come our way again. Okay. Thanks for your help today. Okay, we move on through the agenda, and let me turn to it. We're on planning appeals update, Mr. Weimer.
Yes, we are, Chairman. Have you got the... Bear with me a second. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware that I was going to be attending committee till about 8:15 this morning, so I haven't had an awful lot of time to go through the appeals. But I'm afraid it's the best I've got. So I have got the presentation that Mrs. Housander put together with some notes, and I'm aware of some of them, not necessarily all of them. So I'll do my best to provide an update. If there are any that you feel that they need more debate, then we'll put them back on for the next time when whoever is sitting in this chair has had more than about 15 minutes time to go through them. It's unfortunate. Mrs. Housander was ill overnight, which is why it was the last minute substitution. So the first one's an unusual one. It was an appeal lodged against the council's refusal to discharge conditions, which doesn't happen very often. So the discharge were 3 conditions to do with lighting, landscape ecology management plan, and a construction and ecology management plan. The main application was for an equestrian building. That's the location at Harding Farm near Beer Alston. Next one.
Can I ask any question? Ask on that one before you move on, please. Is that possible? Are there other submissions by the applicants over and above this particular one? I hear through the grapevine that there's trouble in actually retaining their living accommodation.
I can come back.
It concerns me because they're a young. I know them as a member of or as a resident of the area, and they're a young couple with a disabled child, and they've got this approval to run a business, and they're at risk of being made homeless. I find that deeply worrying.
I'm afraid the only information I've got is about this specific appeals on the appeal update. It's not a site I'm personally familiar with. As you know, the majority of my focus tends to be at the other place, so it's not a question I can answer, I'm afraid.
This is the I'm just refreshing my memory about the original application. This was the animal petting and lots of different activities going, wasn't it? Yes, I know the one.
They have a package, of order of a better term, or a business concept that involves multiple strands, cafe and what have you.
Anyway, their appeal was allowed, wasn't it?
My understanding is these were conditions on an application for an indoor equestrian area. So all of the conditions were pre-commencement, but were sought to be discharged after the commencement, which always gets a little bit complicated. The submissions refused due to insufficient information. The inspector, however, indicated that as the condition did not specify how much information, and the inspector considered that the information submitted was acceptable, I think there's a learning point here for us, and I think we will need to either change the standard wording conditions or provide further guidance on the level of information required. I will start talking about the next one, but let Claire catch up with the showing the slides. Or might just defer to the ward member. The next one is Town Meadow at Bridestow. Am I right in thinking that this was a site that I may have been involved in before my primary move to the other place? Is it the same one?
Quite possibly, Mr. Weimer.
It has your footprints on it.
Well, no, I think it was still being refused when I was. So the application was for 28 dwellings at Bridestow. The application was refused on technical matters. The lighting strategy was insufficient to be able to assess the lighting impacts, insufficient information on the B&G baseline, didn't meet carbon reduction didn't meet carbon reduction target. I'll try to stop making up words as I go along. Lack of visitor parking spaces, lack of section 106. So the applicant submitted a unilateral undertaking during the appeal, which dealt with the issue around the lack of section 106. The inspector concluded that the lighting proposed in some cases was less than the previously approved scheme, and in others was not directly impacting on the bat flight zones. In relation to B&G, but I didn't actually that game, but I will just refer to it as B&G for the rest of this presentation. The inspector referred back to a previous scheme and confirmed that 10.34% was agreed at that time, and whilst there may have been some discrepancy between the baseline and the figures, the B&G condition would have provided an opportunity to clarify and noted in the unilateral reference to B&G, and fundamentally said that was fine, and the inspector felt the adherence to the carbon reduction plan would achieve the required amount required for policy. For parking, it was acknowledged there was off-road parking for 2 spaces. In most cases, and with a garage, the road widths allow for passing. So, the inspector considered the application was acceptable. I'll pause in case there is a question. What's interesting, and I'm not making a point on this specific appeal, on appeals generally, I'm assuming most agents have picked this up. If not, I probably need to get an email out. For applications post-April, applications submitted to us after April the 1st this year, there is quite a significant change in the way that the planning inspector are dealing with appeals. My reading of it is that it's going to be harder for appellants to insist on an inquiry or a hearing. I think that's going to be down to more of a PIN's decision, but more importantly, it's going to be, I think, impossible for appellants to submit information to the planning inspectorate that wasn't submitted to the local planning authority when the application was determined. And we've had I feel there may be some clarification required, but I think if so, for argument's sake, if there's a reason for refusal is you have not submitted an ecology report, therefore we can't determine the ecology, and they go to appeal and an ecology report is submitted to the inspector, I think the inspector is going to say, no, we're not accepting that, we're only going to deal with the information submitted with the application, which from a local authority perspective, I think that's probably very helpful, and I think from a PIN's perspective, it also makes it an awful lot easier to deal with. I mean, at the other place, we've had an appeal decision relatively recently where the appellants got criticised that they submitted a lot of information, but they didn't submit it even with the appeal. They submitted it with the on the last day of exchange of comments on statements. So we called foul on the basis, how do you expect us to even consider this when you've submitted it after we've put our final comments in. So in that respect, the inspector just said, it's too late, I'm not taking it into account. But just going forward, that will be, that's going to be quite a significant change.
So is the corollary to that we won't consider applications unless they've got the required components?
That's an interesting question. There's a national validation checklist and a local validation checklist. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily set out the quality of the information. So I'll keep on ecology. If someone submits an ecology with a report saying ecology report on the top, we have to take that at face value. And then when you read through it, you find actually it's not written by an ecologist. It's written by the applicant. Says I've lived here 20 years and I confirm there's no bats. Without any, so we would have to accept that, but we would probably say we need more information on that. And if they say no, we'll determine it as submitted. There'll be a reason for refusal to say you haven't demonstrated there's no impact on ecology. The inspector would then have to take that at face value. I do not believe there'll be an opportunity at appeal for them to submit a ecology written ecology report. Now, I know this is, and I've spoken to a couple of agents recently about it, and I think my interpretation is pretty much universal. So I think it does mean that we shouldn't get a situation where we refuse applications for lack of detail, and then all the detail comes through at an appeal when it's had no real public digestion or public comments on the details. So I think personally, from a transparency point of view of decision making, I think that's quite. The one that sticks to my mind, and apologies for talking about somewhere else, but there was quite a controversial application in the centre of Totnes where there were 5 reason refusal all about technical details, and how those technical details came through would or wouldn't have had different impacts on the surrounding area. And each one of those reports came in with the appeal. So as an authority, we had to deal with and said yes, that deals with all the reasons for refusal, but there's no public consultation on it. There's no real ability for the public to query it other than comments to the inspectorate. So I think from a transparency point of view, I do think it is a step in the right direction, but I also accept from an agent's point of view, it can be quite challenging. I'm happy to take questions on that before I move on, but if there aren't any, I'll just move on. Permission in principle, land adjacent to Huckleberry House. There's a couple. Are members fully aware of how permission in principle works? If not, I'm quite happy. We've got a little bit of time, so permission in principle is basically an alternative way of gaining a planning permission, although it's not actually technically a planning permission. But the key thing is it's in 2 stages. The first stage is permission in principle. And the reason I can talk quite a lot about this is we've lost the repeal of the other place. The inspector has helped to clarify a number of things. So all you're looking at is that site acceptable in principle to site a dwelling in terms of location and number, fundamentally. Everything else is put back to technical details. So where you have a situation, we knew we were pushing the boundaries, so we refused a permission in principle because where they showed the access, and it's the only possible access onto the highway, slap bang in the middle of this access is a TPO tree. And we think it is impossible to access that without harm to the TPO tree. We took the view that that was actually very much a principle, because if you can't access it, how can it be accepted in principle? The inspector has said, no, that's not a matter of principle. That's a matter of technical details. What you need to be looking at is the site acceptable to put residential development on it, full stop. If they can't get an access, that's a matter of technical details. You'd have to deal with technical details. So we lost the appeal. They've got permission in principle. I would question whether it's even worth half the money, the paper it's written on, simply because you've still got the only access with a TPO tree in the middle of the access. So how they'll deal with the technical details, we'll see.
And since one of the major flaws of the planning system that government have recognised is the gap between the amount of planning permissions that are being granted and the implementation of those planning permissions, you can probably form your own conclusions about the value of a PIP when, for the most part, a lot of them will be undeliverable based on the technical details. I just find them really frustrating as instruments.
So does that help members in terms of an overall, this is what we're looking at?
Just one question. When you say the other place, are you referring to the House of Lords?
Move on.
It's probably best I don't answer that.
Move on.
So this in itself is quite an interesting decision, this specific one, because the inspector acknowledged that the site was contrary to the development plan as a whole, being outside the settlement boundary. I'm assuming that's the settlement boundary in the British Neighbourhood Plan.
Yes.
And therefore in conflict with TT25 and the Neighbourhood Plan policy. But concluded that it would contribute to the sustainability of the shop post office and the services offered by Bridgestow. I'm the messenger in this case. Derived from spend in the local authority, and it would also be a benefit for a boost to housing stock in the JLP area where there's a significant shortfall, making reference again to we've only got a 2.5 year housing supply. So when assessed against the policies in the framework as a whole, the adverse impacts derived from the site's location beyond the neighbourhood plan settlement boundary do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of an additional home in this location accessible by foot from the village. Now I think why I find this quite interesting is that the inspector has put quite significant weight on the lack of 5 year supply, saying this will be a significant boost, and it's one dwelling. So I think it's just another strand of evidence behind where I think the government are going, or pins.
That said, we've also had decisions recently that have suggested that such is the shortfall that one dwelling isn't going to make a great deal of difference, and they've formed a conclusion on the other side of the argument as well. So.
Sorry. Application for prior approval for change the use of agricultural barns, so Class Q, Exbourne. You can just see the building in amongst a cluster of other buildings. Prior application was refused. I don't understand the first comment. So prior application was refused. The building didn't receive planning permission. I don't quite follow that. There must be something. So it's a relatively more recent. Okay,
relatively recent and not.
Okay, so it's a relatively recent building, and it needs to be a lawful building to benefit from Class Q. It also didn't meet 3 of the criteria identified in Class Q. It didn't demonstrate there was agricultural use on the relevant date. It's covered by the listing of Solon Farmhouse, and the floor space created was larger than the 465 square metres permitted by Class Q. So that was I'm going to say technical refusal, but most refusals in Class Q are technical refusals simply because planning merit doesn't really come into it. It's either complies with Class Q or it doesn't. Relatively sizable. Erection of a dwelling at Clip Park, North Taunton. The application was refused on 5 reasons. I think predominantly dominant and out of keeping, access was unsafe, overbearing relationship with the adjoining dwelling at 12 Cornfield, and insufficient carbon reduction measures. The inspector, if you want to go to the next plan. The inspector agreed with the LPA that there's a need for smaller properties and not larger properties. And they felt that having driven there himself, the higher objection was reasonable. In terms of size and character, the proposal would sit on a high piece of exposed field, a large sprawling footprint that would amplify its untypically large presence. But the impact of the dwelling itself on its surroundings was unacceptable. And this, coming on from what Phil said, the inspector, as anything for housing development now, the inspector is going to make a comment on the 5-year supply. So the inspector, it is undisputed that the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, where there is a current supply of about 2.5 years. Paragraph 11D, I'm not going to reassess that again. A single dwelling would make a very modest contribution, which, contrary to the other one that said a significant contribution. Noted that there is an adaptable dwelling which could meet the local need, small economic benefits, but the real need is for smaller units, and this outweighs the benefits. And the main conflict is the impact on the significant impact on the surrounding area that doesn't outweigh the benefit of a single dwelling. Change the use of stables to dwelling and creation of a garden, which was allowed. The reasons for refusal were unsustainable location, impact on landscape character, and no Tamar EMS contribution. The inspector agrees that it is an isolated dwelling and occupiers would be reliant on the private car, contrary to policy. It's not incongruous as the other residential dwellings nearby. And its single story and simple design does not make it stand out. There's no negative impact on the area. A unilateral undertaking was submitted with the appeal so that the impacts on the Tamar EMS can be secured through this. What I'm not sure about is whether, in the new appeal regime, whether you'll be able to submit a 106 or a unilateral to deal with issues. If it hadn't been submitted with the application, no doubt that'll be a few appeal decisions. But I think if I was submitting applications, I'd probably make sure that at least heads of terms, or if it was just the Tamar contribution, I think I'd make sure that was in. But in terms of an absolute full-blown, I don't think Section 106 is actually mentioned specifically in the regs. So we'll see how that pans out. The inspector concluded that whilst the proposal would be contrary to the development plan as a whole, the fact that the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply the balance in 11D is applicable, and therefore permission should be granted unless adverse impacts would be significant, and the inspector did not consider that the adverse impacts were significant, therefore tilted balance applied and it was approved.
Can I ask, not so much on the appeals that we're going through, but in the sort of day-to-day decision-making of the decisions that don't come to the committee, if I can put it that way. Yep. Have you noticed significant change in the way we are making decisions because of the change to the MPPF? So applications that you might have been minded to refuse yesterday, you are minded to accept today because of the MPPF and the lack of the 5-year land supply and all of the reasons that we have rehearsed at length today. Have you noticed a discernible difference?
I haven't. I can't say I've noticed a significant difference, because I don't think we've had a significant number. I don't think there's been a significant number of single dwellings in what would have been previously unsustainable locations. I think there will be a difference moving forward. I suspect as time progresses, there will be a greater number of probably larger applications coming forward.
Because it appears, I haven't done the maths, but it appears that when things go to appeal, certainly the inspector applies the revised MPPF and more things are granted on appeal than perhaps used to be.
I think,
if I can put it that way.
yes, I think some of some appeals are taking forever to come through. So some of these appeal decisions, when the application was made and when we made the decision, could well have predated the new standard methodology. I think we would. I'm absolutely certain that when officers are coming to recommendations, they are very much taking into account the fact that we haven't got a 5-year supply, and that, in our view, policies that relate to the distribution of housing, in our view, are now out of date. And yes, so members will, when delegated reports are coming through to you, you will start to see, or you should be already seeing, that policy interpretation coming through on those reports. Definitely, it would be foolish for us not to be doing that, knowing that's what the policy background we're in now.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the other week we were in a training session. We were given to understand that the change in the process and landscape is such that small developments might occur. And I took part in one of the online sessions last week, and I posted a question about settlements, what the definition of a settlement was. And I haven't seen a reply yet, but that was one of those training sessions where there was people from all over the area. Can you give a bit of an update on that? Because what concerns me is that we all know what a beautiful county we have, but you do get little clutches of houses here and there. At what point do they become a settlement? Is it one house, two houses, whatever?
Chairman, through you, is it possible? Can we possibly finish the agenda on the appeals, and then if there are any other planning questions you've got, I'll quite happily do it once the committee's finished. But I think I'd just rather try and get through the agenda first, if possible.
Good plan. Good plan.
So land at west of Spinney Way, outline application for a dwelling. Oh, sorry, you want it or not? So the reason for refusal was that the provision of a single dwelling on a plot this size, in combination with the detached form, would not respond positively to local housing need or make an efficient use of land. fundamentally the inspector agreed. They said that if you're going to deliver housing on that scale, then you should be looking to deliver more than one large property that doesn't really respond to the housing needs of the area. I think that's a very good decision, actually. Station Road, Oakhampton. Retrospective application for the formation of an independent basement flat. The appeal was dismissed. The reason for refusal was the unacceptable relationship between two flats with mutual overlooking and the loss of privacy that would lead to an unacceptably poor standard of residential amenity. I'm afraid I don't know I haven't had a chance to look at the site to see exactly whether any of the Oakhampton members are aware of. I'm assuming it was quite a poor relationship between the two.
Well, it's a conversion. You see the little window at the bottom. So you've got a flat at the bottom. This was done years ago, this conversion. But that's the only light into the flat. But it overlooks the garden of the people above.
Okay. Well, the inspector agreed that there was significant identified harm to the living conditions. And, if it had been done years ago, presumably it's now down to them to either to submit a certificate to demonstrate it was done more than 10 years ago. Application to vary conditions. So our Section 73 application. I'm going to have to park this one till next time. I'm assuming, reading this, I'm assuming that the application was for a larger property than what was approved. Yeah. So we took the view that it was unacceptable because there was no evidence put forward of why it needed to be a bigger property. I think the inspector fundamentally said, you haven't got a policy that sets out how big it should be, so therefore you haven't got a policy hook to refuse it on that basis. I think this is something as a committee you've spoken about before, and I know that Phil is fully aware of that the next iteration of the plan needs to set some parameters around probably worker, manager, and
we talked about this for the Strawberry Fields
application. So, change of use of a garage and annex to a dwelling. Reason for refusal was unsustainable location, insufficient information on carbon reduction, and no Tamar EMS contribution. A unilateral had been submitted, but the inspector considered it to be flawed. The inspector didn't consider it to be isolated and did not agree that it, so lack of 5-year supply was considered, but the harm to the habitat sites for the lack of a unilateral meant that harm outweighed the lack of 5-year supply. Hopefully there aren't too many more, because I'm sure you get tired of hearing my voice in a minute. Why? I had 16 to do last Thursday, so yeah, it's a... Cornways, Tavistock, 3-bedroom dwelling, appeal allowed. So, the inspector accepted amended plans and a unilateral submitted at the appeal process. Considered there was limited adverse effect on the character and appearance of the area that would arise from the removal of 2 low quality trees, and the public benefits outweigh the harm. I think that's it. I am. I'm sorry that I didn't have a little bit more information, but
Nice talking your way through that without prior warning. Right, we now move on to agenda item 9, which is undetermined major applications. And the first thing we'll notice is that 2 of our old friends are missing.
They've been determined, Chair.
They've been determined. Goodness gracious me. That's nice to see them gone, if that's the right word.
They were the oldest we had on the books.
Right. Our usual performance here is to go by exception, as it were. So if there's any undetermined majors that the committee would like to raise, now is your opportunity. I say they have been enhanced by sort of up-to-date comments, so which is helpful.
The report every month should be updated if there's an update to be had.
Yeah, and we are clearing them, and that's good to see. Okay, thank you for that. And that brings us to the end of the committee. So with that, I close the committee. But
can we close the committee first, and then we'll have a private conversation rather than continuing it.
And now's your opportunity to interrogate Mr. Weimer. So.